Welcome to the Lead Well podcast. Around here, we believe leadership shouldn't cost you your peace, your well-being, or the parts of yourself you've worked so hard to reclaim. I'm your host, Trasetta Washington, leadership wellness coach and strategist. And my mission is to give you practical, actionable steps to reduce overwhelm, lead more effectively, and build a sustainable rhythm for both your team and your life. Let's dive into today's conversation. Hey leaders, welcome back to the Lead Well podcast. Today's episode is going to be, it may be a little bit of a tough pill for you to swallow. I might step on your toes just a little bit. So I want to open up with a really important question. And this is not an easy question for you to ask yourself as a leader. In fact, for many leaders, the moment that this question even crosses your mind, there is an immediate urge for you to defend yourself, to explain, or even point to the pressure, the workload, the systems, or the circumstances that you're facing. So let me be clear from the start. This episode is not about blame. I'm not trying to shame you as a leader because you're already carrying a lot. This is about awareness. You know, sometimes your team struggles not because you don't care, but because you're leading from patterns that you really haven't had the space or the support to really take a look at. So here's the question. Am I the problem? Am I the reason that my team is struggling? And if you can be brave enough to genuinely ask this question to your leadership, then it's a sign that you're ready to grow. So today, we're going to explore this question really honestly, but also compassionately, right? What does it really mean to look at your leadership impact? How do your teams experience your leadership under pressure? And what can you do if the answer to this question really feels uncomfortable or maybe even a little confronting? Many leaders really avoid this question because it threatens their identity. It challenges who they are. It challenges that narrative of what it means to be a good leader. And what ends up happening is you get triggered internally and you start coming up with excuses. I don't want to say excuses, but justifications, right? You start coming up with justifications for the way things are. So you may say things like, oh, well, I'm doing my best, or the workload that I have is just completely unreasonable. Or maybe even putting a little blame on your team and just saying, oh, well, they just don't care as much as I do. But here's the thing. Your intention does not cancel out the impact that it has. And if you continue to avoid taking a look at what isn't working or what is negatively impacting the performance of your team, then the patterns are going to remain intact. You're not going to be able to see the true change, the true shifts that you really want to see. Leadership is experienced by your team through impact, not your intention. And most leaders really evaluate themselves by why they did something. However, your team experiences how it lands, right? It's the impact of what you did, right? So this is what's going on inside of you when you're focusing on your intention, right? Most leaders are trying to protect their team from overwhelm or external pressure. You might be trying to maintain standards so that, quality doesn't slip and to keep things moving so that work doesn't bottleneck or stall out. And of course, these are all good intentions, right? There's nothing about them that is malicious or careless. And what ends up happening is leaders tend to associate if their intention is good, then their leadership must be good. But that's only half of the picture, right? Because I already said that your intentions are one thing, but your team doesn't experience your intention. They experience the impact of your leadership. So what's happening inside of your team is that the same behaviors that come out of your good intentions can end up landing very differently for your team, right? So the trying to protect your team could end up landing like pressure, right? So you as a leader absorb everything, which ends up creating urgency and these unspoken expectations. When you are trying to maintain standards, sometimes that can lead to confusion because feedback feels inconsistent or unclear. And then trying to keep things moving, the impact is silence. People will stop asking questions or stop raising concerns because the speed to get things going is prioritized. Now, your team is not reacting to your intention. Oftentimes, they don't know what your intention is. They are reacting to how your behavior impacts them every single day. And you can have all the good intentions in the world and still create struggle within your team. However, leadership growth begins when you start to examine the impact of what you do. I want to share a few just common patterns that we have as leaders that end up creating struggle within our team. Right. So the first one is role creep and just simply wearing too many hats, right? If you are, you're constantly stepping in, your team is losing ownership. You're veering over into their lane. And so you're pulling back that control, you're pulling back that ownership for them. And that loss of autonomy makes your team members feel like, she doesn't trust me. He doesn't trust me. And when that comes into play, then employee engagement becomes an issue. Another one is urgency as being your default. Everything feels like an emergency. And as a result, there's no space or no room, no pause for team members to learn or or to recover for that matter. You're constantly going around fighting fires, just moving from one fire to another and never getting an opportunity to step into fire prevention. This is exhausting. And it is a surefire way to create a culture of burnout within your team. Another one is inconsistent communication, right? You're constantly shifting priorities. Maybe, you set one priority today, but then something else tomorrow, or you communicate really well for a period of time and then go radio silent for another period of time. This creates unclear expectations. And when expectations are unclear, your team members either have to figure it out on their own. And so maybe they don't meet the quality standards that you really are wanting, or they struggle, they just kind of get paralyzed and struggle to move forward at all. And that ends up creating bottlenecks within your workflow. The last one I'll highlight is emotional unpredictability. This is when you allow the stress, the pressure to start to leak into the way that you speak to your team members, into your tone. Maybe it's not so much the words, but the tone of voice that you're using. And let's just be real. We've been there ourselves where we have had to manage the mood of the person that we're working for, who's leading our team, who is our supervisor. So when you get in this place where your emotions are impacting the way that you show up as a leader, Your team now has to manage that. Now they're walking around on eggshells, or they're trying to figure out what kind of mood is he or she in today. How do I need to show up today? That's triggering their nervous system and into dysregulation. And that too is exhausting. And it impacts your ability to focus, to innovate, to think clearly. Now, I want to emphasize that these patterns are typically unconscious. This is not something that you're doing on purpose, right? It is just your modus operandi, if you will. When you are defaulting to these types of patterns, this is what your team is experiencing, excuse me. Your team may feel confused about what expectations are. They may be afraid to speak up, and then they're disconnected from the overall goal, aim, and purpose of the work that they're doing. They don't know how what they're doing fits into the grand scheme of things. So you might start to notice a lower initiative from your team members. They might even give you this surface level agreement, but then they slowly or quietly start to disengage. Now, these are not motivation issues. These are signals to the environment of your leadership. And so it's important for you to go back to self-leadership, right? Go back to taking a look at how am I leading? How am I showing up as a leader? Go back to that internal work. When you operate from a place of self-leadership, that allows you to regulate yourself before you respond to things. So now you're responding from a place of calm and regulation rather than from a place of stress, strain, and pressure, those high emotions. And that gives you an opportunity to clarify before you correct behavior. You're able to gather all the information, not make assumptions before you actually need to correct someone. And I say this all the time, your team is a mirror. Your team is going to respond to your internal state. Now, I'm not saying that you have to be perfect. Nobody's perfect. This is not about perfection. But you do need to be present and you need to be aware. Awareness is key. You can't make adjustments to things that you aren't even aware are present. Here's 4 questions that I think every leader should ask themselves. Number 1, how do people experience me when I am under pressure? Think about the last scenario that you were under a lot of pressure and how you were showing up in the workplace. How do people experience you when you are under pressure? Number 2, where am I unintentionally creating confusion or fear? Think about the way that you communicate. Think about your tone, not simply your word choice, but your tone, your body language. Are you communicating consistently or haphazardly? I don't want to just limit this to to communication, because there's other ways that you can do that, but communication tends to be the primary avenue where that confusion or fear can end up coming from. Question number 3, am I creating space for others to lead? Or am I just filling in all the gaps myself? It's very easy as leaders for us to just pick up the slack, if you will. However, that diminishes your capacity as well as that of your team members, because I'm sure that there is someone on your team who could grow and develop professionally if you allowed them the opportunity to take some ownership over things where there's some gaps. In doing that, you build your leadership bench as well. Right? So am I creating space for others to lead, or am I stepping in and filling all the gaps myself? Question number 4, last question. What behaviors might my team be adapting to? What are the things that I'm doing how am I showing up that my team may be having to adjust to? I encourage you to reflect on these 4 questions from a place of curiosity. This is not about criticizing yourself. This is not about blaming yourself or, beating yourself up. I want you to look at it from a place of curiosity. This is about growth. Let's say you're unsure about any one of these questions. You're like, I'm not really sure. That's fine. Be aware. Keep them now. Take the questions and keep them in the back of your mind as you show up day to day. This awareness, again, this awareness is not failure. This awareness is for you to be able to make adjustments, to make shifts in the way that you show up. These small shifts really matter. And if you aren't sure, then you could ask for some feedback. Ask your team members if you think that they would feel comfortable enough to really speak up. You could ask colleagues what they've observed. And the key here is to not just ask, but to listen. And listen without interrupting. Take notes, right? Listen honestly or genuinely and take to heart whatever it is that they say. Also, identify what causes you stress. Identify the things that trigger stress in you. Again, it's that awareness. If you don't know, you can't do anything about it. You can't change it, right? So figure out what are the things that what are the things that trigger stress in you? And then make sure that you are clarifying expectations on a regular basis. Don't assume. Clarify. It is very possible for you to repair any areas of your leadership where you may be causing strain or struggle in your team, right? It's possible. But you've got to be aware and be willing to make the necessary adjustments. Now, if this episode stirred something for you, that's not a bad thing. Leadership growth often begins with the questions that we would rather avoid. You weren't meant to navigate those questions alone. This is the work that I do with organizations through keynotes and workshops and facilitated leadership conversations. I help leaders to create the space for them to be able to examine their impact, strengthen that self-leadership, and build teams that are clear, engaged, and supported without adding more pressure or blaming yourself. So if your organization is noticing signs of struggle on your teams and you're ready to address them at a leadership level, I would love to support that work. You can learn more or submit a speaking or facilitation inquiry using the link in the show notes. Strong leadership is not about having all the answers. It's really about having the courage to ask the right questions. Until next time, lead well so you can live well.